At my grandson's baby shower, my daughter-in-law picked up the blanket I'd spent 4 months knitting, wrinkled her nose, and dropped it straight into the trash can. "We only use designer items for the baby," she announced, loud enough for the whole room to hear, while a camera was rolling on a tripod 6 feet away. The room did that terrible, nervous laugh, the kind nobody chooses. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I walked over, lifted my blanket out of that trash can, folded it into my cloth tote bag, and left the party without saying another word to anyone. That night, my son called me. His voice was cracking like a boy half his age. "Mama," he said, "please, tell me the truth. Is the blanket still there? What's inside it?" I sat down at my kitchen table on Edgewood Avenue. I held that blanket in my lap, my husband Marcus's last gift, still tucked safe inside its lining, right where I had sewn it. And I said, very quietly, "Why are you asking me that, Jamal?" "Because I need to know what my wife threw into a trash can in front of 25 people for the crime of being handmade. And I need to know what happened when the whole family finally found out the truth." Welcome to today's story, where the gift they called cheap was the only thing in that room that money could never have bought. Stay with me all the way to the end, leave a comment, and if this story speaks to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. My name is Etta Mae Washington, 68 years old. I have run a sewing and alterations shop on Edgewood Avenue in Atlanta for 42 years, and in all that time I have held on to one belief like it was stitched into me. The things you make with your hands carry more of you than anything money can buy. I still believe that. What nobody in that room knew, not Keisha, not her mother Monique standing in the corner loaded down with gold jewelry and certainty, not even my own son Jamal, who was staring at his brand new shoes by the window like they might tell him something, was that the blanket Keisha had just thrown away was not the real one. The real one had never left my house. Now, Jamal called me at 11:30 that night. His voice was cracked open in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. And when he asked me what was inside that blanket, I didn't answer him right away. I just sat at my kitchen table on Edgewood Avenue in the quiet, with that cream blanket folded in my lap, and I thought about Marcus. Because this story doesn't start with Keisha. It doesn't start with that trash can. It starts with my husband, and with the promise he made me keep before he left this world. Stay with me, because what Marcus hid inside that blanket is the part that changes everything. My husband, Marcus Washington, died 14 months before that baby shower. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. That is how that particular cruelty works. You get almost no time to prepare, and you spend the rest of your life wondering if you said everything you needed to say. I think I did. I believe we both did. Marcus was a quiet man, 6'2", lean, with big square shoulders I used to lean my head against when the day had worn me flat. He wore flannel shirts and khaki pants and a John Deere cap that had been on his head so long I couldn't picture his face without it. He drove the same Ford F-150 for 11 years, said a truck that runs is a truck that works, and he didn't need anything prettier than useful. He was like that about most things. When Jamal called to tell us Keisha was pregnant, our first grandchild, a boy, Marcus was already in treatment. He was in that hospital recliner with the IV line going, and when he heard, his whole face just opened up. I hadn't seen him smile like that in months. He reached over and took my hand. "We're going to need a blanket, Etta Mae," he said. That was all. Just that. I started knitting the week after we buried him. Cream yarn, because Marcus always said cream was the color of new things. Navy sailboat border, because he had made a real promise, out loud, with seriousness, that he was going to take that little boy to Lake Lanier one summer, teach him to fish, show him that patience was the most important thing a man could carry. Every night I knitted after the shop closed. My hands ached from the arthritis that had been working itself into my knuckles for years, but I kept going. There is something grief does to the hands when they stay busy. It doesn't take the grief away, but it gives it somewhere to go, Every stitch was a conversation I was still having with Marcus. Every row was my way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still honoring what we built. What nobody knew was that before Marcus passed, he had given me a cedar cigar box he'd kept on the top shelf of our bedroom closet for years. Inside it, a handwritten letter to his grandson, savings bonds, and a printed account statement for a college fund he had been quietly adding to for 18 years, in the name of a grandchild who hadn't been born yet. $1.2 million. Marcus worked 30 years in logistics management. He was not a flashy man. He packed his lunch. He wore shoes until the soles came apart. But he thought long. He thought in generations. He grew up with nothing, and he was determined that his grandson would start somewhere different. He told me, "Don't tell Jamal yet, Etta. Wait until the baby comes. Sew it all into the blanket. The account information, the letter, all of it, so it travels safe." So that is what I did. Late one night, with the lamp on and the street gone quiet, I sewed a hidden pocket into the lining of that blanket, put the original letter inside, the original account statement, the bonds, stitched it shut with the smallest stitches I had ever made in 42 years of sewing. You couldn't feel it unless you knew exactly where to press. Aaliyah called while I was finishing. Marcus's younger sister, 64, sharp as cut glass, the kind of woman who notices everything and only says what matters. She had come over earlier that week and sat across from me at the kitchen table, watching me work in the lamplight without a word. Then, quietly, "Do you need me to keep copies of any of that, Etta?" I looked up. "How did you know?" She smiled that small, certain smile she had. "Because Marcus told me you would." So Aaliyah held the copies, I held the original, and the blanket I brought to that baby shower was the second blanket, made specifically, deliberately, for that occasion. Same color, same pattern, same size, empty inside. Just yarn and love, nothing hidden. A perfect decoy. I made the switch 2 days before the shower, after Keisha called to ask what I was bringing. She had that tone she sometimes used, polished on top, dismissive underneath. "Oh, you're bringing a homemade gift. That is so sweet of you, Miss Etta." I heard everything that lived in that pause. In the months before, I had heard a great deal. I had heard Keisha call my shop "that little hobby of yours." Heard her tell Jamal at my own kitchen table that she didn't want old-fashioned things cluttering up the nursery. And I had heard my son, 34 years old, his father's jaw, his father's eyes, nod slowly and say nothing. That silence was the thing that hurt most, not Keisha's words, Jamal's silence. There is a name for what Jamal had been doing, though he wouldn't have called it anything. Conflict avoidance. And from the inside, it never feels like cowardice. It feels like keeping the peace, like being the reasonable one, like not making things worse. But silence held long enough in the face of someone being hurt isn't neutrality. It's a quiet vote for the hurt to keep going. Jamal wasn't a bad man. He was a frightened one. And those two things can look exactly the same from the outside, which is what makes them so hard to separate. But there was something else I hadn't told anyone. When I reached into that trash can at the shower and lifted the decoy blanket out, I turned it over, and I saw it. A small cardstock tag looped through the corner with a rubber band. Written in Keisha's handwriting in black ink. "Return if too basic." She had written that before the party even started. She had planned it. I folded the tag inside the blanket, said nothing, drove home. That night Jamal called. His voice was broken in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "Mama, please. Is the blanket still there? What's inside it? Please." I held the phone and breathed slowly. "Why are you asking me that, Jamal?" He couldn't answer right away. "Because," he finally said, "I think I just understood what I let happen, and I think it's worse than I knew." I didn't tell him everything. I just held Marcus's voicemail close, the one I'd listened to maybe 100 times since he passed. His voice, unhurried, like he was calling from the kitchen on a regular Tuesday. "Etta, if there comes a day when the kids only see cheap yarn and don't look deeper, don't be angry. Just show them there are things that look poor on the outside and are rich all the way through. I played that voicemail on the drive home, windows up, gospel station low. Then I pulled into my driveway on Edgewood Avenue, sat in the dark for a while, and began to plan the dinner. Because Marcus had always told me, when the moment comes, don't react, prepare. And the moment had arrived. I gave it 3 weeks. 3 weeks of short texts and careful phone calls. 3 weeks of Jamal being gentle with me in that particular way grown children get when they know they've done wrong but haven't figured out how to say it yet. I let him stay uncomfortable. Went back to the shop. Hemmed Mrs. Patricia Hendricks's granddaughter's homecoming dress on a Tuesday. Sat on my porch swing Thursday evening, the one that has been creaking since the Eisenhower administration, and drank coffee with my neighbor Betty Okafor while she told me about her own family troubles, and I listened and said very little, because sometimes listening is the whole gift. Then I called Jamal on a Tuesday morning. Bring Keisha, Sunday dinner, 6 o'clock. Just the 3 of us. I'll make ribs. He paused. You sure, Mama? I'm sure. Saturday, I cleaned my kitchen from ceiling to floor, seasoned the ribs with Marcus's dry rub from the index card he'd written out in 1987, the one with the grease splatter and the old coffee stain from the Sunday I'd knocked my mug over reaching for the phone during church potluck prep. And I set the table with the good dishes, white with gold rims. Marcus's mother left them to us when she passed. I only brought them out for things that mattered. They arrived at 6:08. Jamal ducked under the doorframe the way he'd been doing since 10th grade, kissed my cheek. Smells incredible in here, Mama. Keisha came in behind him in a caramel wrap coat, perfect hair, a bag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She handed me a bottle of sparkling cider with both hands and said, "Good evening, Miss Etta," in the voice she used when she was demonstrating that she had manners. I thanked her. I took their coats. I fed them. The first 20 minutes were almost pleasant. Jamal talked about work. Keisha mentioned strollers. The baby's name was going to be Marcus. Jamal had held firm on that. And something in me eased every time I heard it. Then the front door opened. I had expected that. Monique Bennett did not wait to be let in. She never did. She came through my door like she came through every door, loud, with gold jewelry and a bright blouse, settling into a chair at my table like she'd been sitting there for years. Helped herself to cornbread before I'd even offered it. Launched straight into a review of the baby shower gifts as though the last 3 weeks hadn't happened at all. That Gucci infant set from Keisha's coworkers was just gorgeous, she said. And that Pottery Barn crib set, nearly $400. That is the kind of thing a child grows up knowing. I let her talk, poured sweet tea, watched Jamal study his plate. Now, I want to stop here for just a moment, because what Monique was doing at my table wasn't simply bad manners. It was something older and more complicated than that. Monique had spent decades climbing out of a life that never felt like enough, and she had taught her daughter that the proof of having made it was in the label, the brand, the thing other people could see and recognize. When she talked about Gucci at my table, she wasn't talking about a baby gift. She was defending a whole belief system she had built her identity around. And belief systems don't back down when challenged. They dig in. They get louder. That's what made Monique more dangerous than simply rude. She genuinely believed she was right. Then she said, with a small dismissive laugh aimed somewhere between the centerpiece and me, "Of course not everything can be Gucci." She looked at me when she said it. Just for a second. Just enough. I put down my tea glass, stood up, walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left my phone, and I pressed play on the voicemail. Marcus's voice filled that room like he had walked through the door himself, unhurried, low. "Etta, if there comes a day when the kids only see cheap yarn and don't look deeper, don't be angry. Just show them there are things that look poor on the outside and are rich all the way through." I left enough, sweetheart. Lord knows I left enough for all of them. The room went still. Keisha's fork stopped in midair. Monique's gold bracelets made a soft sound as her hands lowered to the table. Jamal was looking at me now, those big eyes of his, the ones that had never once learned to hide anything, filling up. I turned off the voicemail, sat back down, reached into the cloth tote on the back of my chair and laid the decoy blanket flat on the table between us. Then I picked up the small silver embroidery scissors Marcus had given me for our 25th anniversary and opened the left seam. Keisha leaned forward in spite of herself. I reached in and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. A printed copy, Aaliyah's copy, of the Education Trust Account Statement. $1.2 million. Held in irrevocable trust for Marcus David Washington, Jr., accessible at 18 for qualified educational expenses only. Established by Marcus Theodore Washington, Sr., 37 years of packed lunches, 37 years of worn-out shoes and a used truck, and a man who never needed anyone to see what he was building. The rain had started against the kitchen window. I could hear it in the silence. Monique said, barely above a whisper, "Is that real?" "It is," I said. Keisha looked at Jamal. Jamal was still looking at me, his jaw tight the same way Marcus's would get when he was holding something painful and hadn't decided yet whether to let it out. Then Keisha's voice, and I could hear the old armor going up even then, even in that moment. "Well, nobody told us. How are we supposed to know? You should have said something, Miss Etta. You can't blame us for—" "Keisha." Jamal's voice, quiet, flat, final in a way I had never heard from him before. She stopped. "You threw my mother's gift into a trash can," he said, "in front of our whole family, and I stood right there by the window and didn't say one single word." He pressed the heels of his hands hard against his eyes, then dropped them. "I didn't say one word." "Jamal, honey," Monique started. "No, ma'am." One slow shake of his head. "Not this time." What was happening to Jamal in that moment? I recognized it, even through my own pain. When a person has spent years swallowing their discomfort to keep peace, there eventually comes a point where everything they never said becomes too heavy to hold. It isn't dramatic from the outside. It just looks like a man going still and quiet in a different way than usual. The tipping point is rarely the loudest moment. It's the one where the cost of staying silent finally outweighs the fear of the storm. Jamal had carried that weight for a long time. I watched him put it down. Keisha's eyes were wet, real tears. I had learned to tell the difference over the years, and these were real. But defensiveness was still underneath them. She was crying and already building her next argument at the same time, the way people do when they haven't fully arrived at the truth yet. I didn't know what was inside. That's exactly the point, Keisha. Jamal's voice had gone quieter, not louder. You didn't have to know. It was my mother's hands. That should have been enough. Monique erupted, half out of her chair, voice rising, accusing me of staging the whole evening, of baiting her daughter, of setting a trap for people who had done nothing wrong. And for the first time in 34 years of raising him, my son raised his voice at a woman who was not me. She didn't bait anyone. My mother sat alone and knitted something for our child for 4 months with arthritic hands, after burying my father, while she was grieving, and your daughter picked it up, called it bacteria, and threw it in a trash can in public. His voice cracked at the edges. You do not get to sit at her table and call that a trap. Monique's mouth opened. For the first time since I'd known her, it closed again without a word. There was a water glass near Jamal's left hand. I saw his knuckles go white around it for a moment. Then he breathed through it. He was choosing something. I could see him choosing it. I reached across and laid my hand over his fist, just so he knew I was there. He looked at me, and I saw in his face the boy he used to be and the man he was still becoming, and I thought, Marcus, you should be here for this. The money stays in trust, I said to the table. Jamal is administrator, Aaliyah is co-trustee. Neither of you can touch it for anything except this child's education. That was Marcus's wish, and I honored it. I looked at Keisha. You didn't lose your son's inheritance tonight. What you lost was your chance to be trusted with it freely. But the real moment, the one none of them were ready for, was still coming. Stay with me. Keisha left the table. Not dramatically, she just pushed her chair back quietly, said, "Excuse me," in a voice barely holding itself together, and walked to the guest bathroom off my hallway. Closed the door behind her without a sound. Monique sat across from me. The fight had gone out of her, at least for now. She was working something over behind her eyes, the way people do when they've just heard something they can't argue away. Her gold earrings caught the light. She looked at the trust document, looked at the open seam of the decoy blanket, looked at me, said nothing. Jamal hadn't moved, both hands flat on Marcus's old kitchen table, the one we'd found at a garage sale on Moreland Avenue in 1986, the one with the water ring on the corner from 37 years of Sunday morning coffee. Staring at his father's name on that account statement like he was reading something in a language he'd only just learned. Then my front door opened. Aaliyah let herself in with her spare key. She came to the kitchen doorway in her gray blazer with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a manila envelope under one arm, and she looked at the table with the expression of a woman who has been expecting this evening for several weeks. She had been. She looked at Jamal, looked at the document, said, "Good," pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down. "Aaliyah," Monique tried. "Monique." Aaliyah's voice was pleasant the way a closed door is pleasant, polite on the surface and not moving an inch. "Before you say whatever you're working up to, I want to show you something." She opened the envelope, placed a printed sheet on the table face up, a screenshot of a text message exchange. Monique's name and number at the top. The messages were to a woman named Darlene Patterson. I knew her from church, from the alto section of the choir. And in them, Monique was asking about sourcing handmade quilts wholesale, traditional quilts, the kind made by older Black women in the South, for a home decor pop-up she was planning. She had written, "I need authentic-looking pieces, something grandmotherly, the real old-school kind, but at a low price point so I can mark them up enough to make it worth it." And then there was a second exchange, same date as the baby shower, different contact. In it, Monique had written, "You will not believe Jamal's mama brought a hand-knitted blanket to the baby shower, like something out of a church rummage sale. These old ladies and their sad little projects, I swear." That message had been sent 2 hours after Keisha dropped the decoy blanket in the trash. Monique looked at the paper. Something shifted in her face that I had never seen there before. "Where did you sent that second one to Darlene Patterson," Aaliyah said, "who sings alto in my choir at Greater Piney Grove, and who, when she heard what happened at the shower, forwarded both threads to me without my asking." Monique had nothing. Keisha had come back from the bathroom. She was standing in the hallway entrance, mascara repaired, expression reset, and she saw the paper in Aaliyah's hand. Saw her mother's face, went very still. "So," Aaliyah said, hands folded on the table, voice still pleasant, "on the same afternoon your daughter disposed of a handmade blanket as unhygienic and beneath your standards, you were privately shopping for handmade items from older Black women at the lowest possible price to resell to other people for profit." Silence. Monique said quietly, "That is a completely different—" "Mama," Keisha's voice was barely there. "Is that true?" Nobody answered, and the silence answered for them. Keisha looked at her mother for a long moment, and I watched something move across her face. Not anger exactly, but something deeper and less comfortable than anger. The kind of reckoning that doesn't stop at the present, but reaches back through your whole history, through every lesson you were ever taught about what made a person worth respecting. What Keisha was sitting with in that moment is something worth understanding. She hadn't arrived at cruelty on her own. She had been handed a set of tools, brand names, price points, visible markers of status, and told these were how you measured a good life, a worthy person, a real gift. She had used those tools faithfully and never thought to question what they might be costing the people around her. That is not innocence, but it is something that can be unlearned, if a person is willing to be still long enough to feel the weight of what they have done. Monique, for her part, had built her whole sense of self on having climbed. And people who have climbed hard often protect the ladder fiercely, even when the ladder is standing on someone else's back. It doesn't make it right, but it explains how a woman can look at something made with love and see only something cheap, without ever once understanding the contradiction in herself. Then Aaliyah picked up her phone and turned the screen around. It was video from the baby shower. Keisha's own camera, her own tripod, her own live segment that she'd started before the gift opening and forgotten to end. The clip had captured everything. Keisha holding the cream blanket, the nose wrinkle, the comment about bacteria clear as a bell, the trash can. More than 400,000 people had seen it. The hashtag was simple. Hashtag respect our elders. A parenting group out of Buckhead had shared it first. Then a national Facebook community for Black grandmothers, 2 parenting blogs, a morning radio segment out of Charlotte. 3 brands in active conversation with Keisha's account had quietly stopped returning messages. Keisha sat down slowly, the way your body sits when your knees stop cooperating. I thought I deleted it, she said. I went back and You deleted the original post, Aaliyah said gently. Someone had already saved it. Keisha put her face in her hands. Monique turned toward the window. Outside, the rain was still coming down soft and steady on the magnolia tree and the driveway and 42 years of the life I had made on this street. Jamal looked at his wife, then looked at me, and I saw in his face the particular sorrow that comes not from what someone did to you, but from what you allowed to happen while you were standing right there. I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, the small one by the front door where I keep extra blankets, winter coats, and a stack of hat boxes I've been meaning to sort through since 2019. Reached up to the highest shelf behind a pile of Marcus's old flannel shirts I still hadn't been able to give away. Brought down a bundle wrapped in white tissue paper, carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the table. Unwrapped it slowly. Cream wool, navy sailboat border, softer than the decoy. I had ordered the better wool for this one specifically because I wanted it to last 100 washings and still come back warm. And in the left seam, every stitch exactly as I had placed it, the hidden pocket. Original letter in Marcus's handwriting, original account documents, savings bonds folded small, all of it. Right where I had put it. I looked at Keisha. The blanket you threw away was the one I made to check my pattern, I said. I made it first so I could see where the stitches ran right and where they didn't. The real blanket, the one with your son's name in his grandfather's hand, the one that holds what Marcus spent 18 years building, has never left this house. Nobody spoke. I want you to understand what was happening beneath the surface of that room. When Keisha threw what she believed was the blanket away, she felt powerful. She had declared what she valued, in public, and nobody stopped her. But power that is built on humiliating someone who has chosen not to fight back is not real power. It is borrowed time. What she was learning now, at my kitchen table, was the difference between dominance and strength. Dominance requires someone beneath you. Strength requires nothing from anyone else. I had been building mine for 14 months, quietly, without an audience, stitch by stitch. I want to be clear, I said. I did not make a decoy to trap you. I made it because something told me to protect what was real. Maybe that was old woman's instinct. Maybe it was Marcus still watching over that little boy from wherever he went. I put my hand flat on the real blanket, but I need you to understand what was almost gone tonight. Not the money, not the account. The last thing Marcus wrote in this world, written by his own hand, for a grandson he loved before that grandson ever drew breath. Keisha came apart, not quietly, not carefully. She cried the way people cry when something cuts through every layer of performance and reaches the actual person underneath. Jamal pulled her close. He was crying too, silently, shoulders shaking. Monique stood at my kitchen window with her arms crossed and her back to us. I watched her shoulders rise and fall once, slowly. She wasn't ready to say what she needed to say, but she was getting closer. I sat at the head of my table, picked up my tea, which had gone cold, drank it anyway. After a while, I said, "You didn't throw away Marcus's legacy. You threw away your chance to be trusted with it freely. That can be rebuilt, but not tonight. Not because you asked, not because you cried." I looked at Keisha, then at Jamal. The same way everything real gets built, slowly, one stitch at a time, only if you mean every one. Jamal stood up, came around the table, and hugged me the way he used to when he was 7 and had done something he was ashamed of. Both arms all the way around, face pressed into my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mama, for not saying something at the party. For every time I went quiet when I should have spoken. For all of it. I know, baby. Is it too late?" "No, but it will cost you something." "What?" "Your silence," I said. "You have to give that up. For good. You can't stay quiet anymore when you know something's wrong." He nodded against my shoulder. "And Keisha," I spoke over his shoulder to where she sat with her hands in her lap. "You didn't lose your son's inheritance tonight. You lost the chance to be trusted with it without conditions. That is what you owe this family, not an apology, a change." She looked up, nodded once, small, real. I let Jamal go. The first week was awkward. That is the honest truth, and I am too old to pretty it up. Real reconciliation doesn't look like the movies. It looks like Keisha sending me a text on a Monday morning that says, "I've been thinking about what you said," and then going quiet for 2 days. It looks like Jamal calling just to say hello, running out of words by the 3rd sentence, and ending with, "Anyway, I love you, Mama," before he hangs up, fast, like a man practicing something he let go rusty. I did not rush it. Forgiveness is not the same thing as trust. You can forgive someone fully and still require them to earn their way back. That is not coldness, that is wisdom. There is a difference between a mother who holds the door open and one who pretends it was never closed. I held it open. I did not pretend. I went back to the shop. Mrs. Patricia Hendricks came in from down on Boulevard with her granddaughter's prom dress to be taken in, and we spent 40 cheerful minutes arguing about whether emerald green or royal blue was the better formal color, while I pinned the side seams with my mouth full of straight pins. The way Marcus used to say made me look like a very serious porcupine. Betty Okafor came over Thursday evening, and we sat on the porch swing in the cool November air and drank coffee and watched the street go by. The swing creaked its old, familiar creak. The magnolia tree stood where it always had. The trust documents were filed with an attorney on Peachtree Road the following Monday. Aaliyah was there. Jamal was there. The account was legally secured in little Marcus's name, with protections that neither Jamal nor Keisha could change without Aaliyah's co-signature until a child was grown. What Marcus had built over 18 years of quiet, stubborn faithfulness was safe. Little Marcus David Washington Jr. was born in March, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had Jamal's eyes and, according to Aaliyah, who stood at the nursery window for a long time the morning after, the same serious expression Marcus Sr. used to wear when he was thinking something all the way through. I drove to Piedmont Hospital on a cold Wednesday morning and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. Then Jamal came out to get me, and I walked into that room and held my grandson for the first time. The cream blanket with the navy sailboat border was already on him when I arrived. Keisha had asked Jamal to bring it from the house. She had placed it in the crib herself. 3 weeks after little Marcus came home, Keisha called me on her own. Not a text, not Jamal calling for her. Her own voice on the phone, asking if she could come by the shop. She showed up on a Tuesday in flat shoes and a simple blouse. No bag, hair back plain. She sat down at my work table, looked at the sewing machine the way you look at something you've underestimated, and said, "Would you teach me how to fix a hem?" I looked at her hands, manicured, careful, completely unacquainted with thread and needle. "I can do that," I said. "It's not complicated, but you have to be patient with yourself." "I can try," she said. She stuck herself twice, had to rethread the needle 4 times. Said a word I will pretend I did not hear on the 3rd attempt. But she stayed. She didn't leave when it got frustrating. She asked real questions. How stitch tension works, why you have to go back over the corner twice, what happens when the bobbin runs out mid-seam. She came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. By the 5th week, she was making a burp cloth for the baby. Plain yellow flannel, nothing complicated. Her stitches were wide and uneven the way everyone's first stitches are, but they held. The week she finished it, she laid it on my table and said, "I understand something now that I didn't before. Every stitch costs something. Time. Focus. You have to really want it to come out right, or you can feel it in the work. I turned it over, checked the seams. It's good work, Keisha. It's not perfect. No, I said, but perfect was never the point. That little boy is going to drool all over it and chew the corner until it falls apart. But you made it, and one day you might tell him that. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Miss Etta, I need you to know that I know it wasn't just a blanket. I know you know now, I said. I grew up thinking the way you showed love was by giving better things. Things with labels on them. Things that proved you were doing well. She paused. My mama, that's just how she showed us. That we were climbing. That we had made it further than she had. I understood that, more than she might have expected. Because that hunger, the hunger to prove you'd arrived, to hold up the label as evidence of your own worth. I knew it from my own people, my own history. My grandmother who saved her good china for company and drank from a chipped cup herself. My mother who ironed her work clothes at 5 a.m. because pressed clothes meant dignity, and dignity in this country has always meant survival. I know that hunger, I said. I was raised near it. But there is a difference between honoring where you came from and letting that hunger make you cruel to someone else's love. Those are two different things, and one of them is a choice. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when something actually lands. What I was watching in Keisha over those weeks was not just a woman learning to sew. It was a woman learning to sit with discomfort instead of buying her way out of it. That is slower work than it sounds. She had been fluent in a language her whole life, brand names, price points, visible proof of worth. And she was learning a new one, patience, making, imperfect effort. She was doing it. That matters more than most people will ever say out loud. Jamal found a counselor on Piedmont Avenue, a black man, a father himself, who worked with what he called conflict avoidance patterns in high-achieving families. Jamal told me about it himself, unprompted, on a Sunday phone call. That was its own kind of progress. He started taking little Marcus to Piedmont Park on Sunday mornings, just the two of them, the way Marcus used to take him to Cascade Road Park when he was small. Sometimes he called me from those walks, just to talk, or to hold the phone near the stroller so I could hear the birds. One Sunday in April, he said, "Mama, I'm going to take him to Lake Lanier this summer, when he's big enough to hold a fishing pole." "That's good, Jamal. I'm going to tell him everything I remember about Daddy, all of it." "That's how it lives on," I said. "That's the whole point." Monique was quieter after that night. I don't know exactly what passed between her and Keisha in private. I suspect quite a lot. But when I saw her at Marcus Jr.'s baby dedication at Greater Piney Grove Baptist Church on a bright Sunday in May, she crossed the fellowship hall and took my hand in both of hers and held it a beat longer than a handshake. She didn't say much. Sometimes the most honest apology a person can make is the one that comes without words, because the words haven't caught up to the feeling yet. I didn't need the words. I just needed to see that she was thinking. The video faded the way those things do. Keisha took her lifestyle account down for several months. When she brought it back, it was different, quieter, more honest. She posted a picture of the burp cloth she had made with her own hands, and the caption read, "Some lessons take a long time to learn, better late than never." It got more responses than anything she'd posted in 2 years. The trust was safe. The blanket was where it belonged. And something in this family, still imperfect, still learning, was being stitched back together. Slowly. The only way anything real ever is. It was a late May evening, the kind Atlanta hands you a few of each year. Light going long in amber, air full of honeysuckle, and somebody's backyard grill drifting down the block. I was standing in the doorway of the nursery at Jamal and Keisha's house in East Atlanta Village, not saying anything, just looking. Little Marcus was 6 weeks old. He was in his crib, fed and clean and as deeply satisfied as only very new babies can be. His small chest rising and falling with the slowest, most complete rhythm I have ever had the privilege of watching. Across him, draped soft over his sleeping body, was the cream blanket with the navy sailboat border. The real one. The one Marcus had asked me to make before he left. Jamal came and stood beside me. He was quiet in the new way he had been learning, Not the old, avoidant quiet that used to fill the space where his voice should have been, but something steadier. His father's kind of quiet, the kind that says, "I am here, I am not going anywhere." We stood like that for a while, just the two of us, watching that baby breathe. "He looks like Daddy," Jamal said. "Around the eyes," I said, "and the forehead. Your daddy had that same broad forehead. Always said it meant more room for thinking." Jamal made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Do you think Daddy knew?" he said. "When he set everything up, do you think he knew it might come to this?" I thought about Marcus in the hospital recliner, about the cedar cigar box on the top shelf of our closet, about the voicemail he'd left me on an ordinary afternoon, like a man just checking in. "He knew a grandson was coming," I said. "He didn't need the details, he just prepared. That's what he was always doing, quietly preparing for the people he loved. The whole time we were living our life together, that's what he was doing." Jamal was quiet for a moment. "I spent so many years trying not to make waves," he said. "Thought that's what a good man did. Keep everyone comfortable, keep the peace." "I know. It wasn't that, though. It was just being afraid." "Yes," I said, "but you're not afraid anymore." He looked at me. "How can you tell?" "Because you're standing here, talking to me instead of calling from the parking lot." He laughed then, a full, real laugh, and put his arm around my shoulders. I leaned into him the way I used to lean into Marcus, the same warmth, the same steadiness. This man built from the same material as his father, even when he hadn't known it yet. From down the hall came the sound of Keisha in the kitchen, cabinets opening and closing, water running, the ordinary music of an evening settling into itself. She appeared in the doorway a moment later with 3 mugs of chamomile tea. She handed me mine first, both hands, the way you pass something to someone when you are trying to show, through action rather than words, that you understand now what it means to offer something with care. We stood there, the 3 of us, in the soft evening light, watching that sleeping baby. "He's going to want to know everything," Keisha said quietly. "When he's old enough, he's going to ask about all of it." "Then we tell him all of it," I said. "The good and the hard and the complicated. That's what history is for. Not to make us proud of ourselves, to show us what we came from and what we owe going forward." She nodded, and I could see in her face that she was beginning to understand something she might spend the rest of her life learning to fully hold. That the things made by hand, built in silence over years of discipline and love and grief, are not lesser than the things with labels. They are the things that last. They are what a child wraps himself in while he sleeps and carries forward without knowing it into every version of himself he'll ever become. I rested my hand on the blanket. Cream wool, warm from the baby's body, the slight ridge of the hidden seam, now empty, the documents filed safely with the attorney, protected for the next 18 years. But the pocket was still there, those tiny, careful stitches still holding. "Marcus," I whispered, quiet enough that maybe only the room heard me. "We did it, sweetheart. We kept it safe." The evening light came through the curtains and lay in long gold bars across the crib. That was enough. That was everything. I am 68 years old. I buried the man who was my whole life. I stood in a room of 25 people while someone dropped my grief and my love and 4 months of arthritic work into a trash can. I sat alone at my kitchen table in the small hours and chose, deliberately, quietly, not to react in anger, but to prepare in dignity. I waited, I stayed steady, and I let the truth find its own way home. It did. It always does. Maybe not when you want it to, maybe not how you imagined. But truth that is protected with patience and clear eyes does not stay buried. It surfaces. It finds the light. To every woman who has ever made something by hand for someone who didn't recognize what it cost, hear me. Your labor was not invisible. Your love was not wasted. And some of the people you made things for will come to understand, eventually, what they were holding. To every mother who has swallowed her hurt to keep the family peace, who has folded her dignity into a cloth tote bag and walked out with her head up. Your patience was not weakness, but your voice matters too. Use it with preparation. Use it with clear eyes. Use it at the right table at the right time. And to every family that has ever confused the price of something with its value, I hope you learn what Keisha is learning, what Jamal has learned, what Monique is still quietly working out in her own way. The most valuable thing in any room is almost never the one with the label. It is the one made with hands and time and love and grief and hope. Built in the dark while no one was watching by someone who loved you more than you ever knew how to see. The porch swing on Edgewood Avenue still creaks. The shop is open Tuesday through Saturday. The trust is protected for 18 years and one remarkable boy who will grow into it. And the blanket is exactly where it belongs. This story reminds us that the things built in silence, with calloused hands, in the small hours, out of grief and love and long patience, are the things that last. That dignity is not something anyone can take from you. You carry it quietly inside, and it waits. And it is never too late to sit down at someone's table, pick up a needle, and begin to learn the difference between what something costs and what it is truly worth. Some of the most important lessons of our lives arrive the only way they can, stitch by stitch. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today, because somewhere right now there is a grandmother with calloused hands and a full heart who deserves to know that someone sees her and sees the worth of everything she has quietly, faithfully built. If you're watching from your recliner with something warm in your hands, neighbor, this one was made for you.